All right. Well, it looked like it was coming through okay. Um, Let me know if it's not, and we'll just switch back to Facebook like we had to before. But this is what I'm working on, this big giant piece of paper here, and it's actually a 2-page spread. So what it is inside of a comic book, for those of you that don't know, you don't always see 1 page at a time. And in fact, you rarely see 1 page at a time. You actually see 2 pages at a time, most cases. And in this case, this is the opening 2-page spread. So the story begins, with a 2-page spread. And I wanted to show you this comic book to show you how much bigger it is than the actual finished piece. Okay. And I did the layout on a computer, digitally penciling it, because as you'll see when we pull away and you see what's underneath this, there is a lot of mechanical drawing involved, and it would actually require, to do the perspective, to have rulers that are just like 7 feet long, and you'd have to go completely off the page, or you'd have to use some old drafting tools that can accommodate that. But I don't have that, nor do I have the space. So what I did was I used digital rulers to actually, and I'll walk through it, do the 2, 3, whatever point perspective I needed for each shot. There was only one panel where I just kind of abandoned using tons of perspective. Okay, well, we'll get right into it. And actually, in order to do that, the layout is actually already underneath this. What I do is I print it out on a piece of paper, and you will see the entire layout is underneath here. So I put it on my light board, which is old technology for making comic books, and you'll be able to see it as soon as I put this off. As you can see, the light shines through from behind, and what we have here is a series of buildings. And we have an establishing shot. We actually have 2 establishing shots, and then we have 3 panels that follow after that, one of them being a close-up character shot. This one actually just being the result of the prior 2, and then we have a transition where all these little robots are shown to be in these hexagonal cases and stuff. So all right, actually turn this light off as well. You can actually see it a lot better. Now, one of the things I always have with me when I'm penciling is obviously the script. And obviously it says, panel 1, we start with an establishing shot of a futuristic industrial landscape with lots of many storied factories and smokestacks billowing smoke and exhaust. I don't want this to look like dystopian by any means, but it should look crowded, busy, futuristic, construction equipment, cranes, flying vehicles, both in the foreground and the background. Okay. Now, generally, I don't get scripts that say, foreground, middle ground, background. So I have to think that right off the bat. What am I doing? How am I framing the shot? And what am I using to guide the eye to the next panel? Now, I decided to use really wide landscape panels just because that's something I've been doing a lot lately, and I've been interested in solving visual problems with that. Okay, and in this opening panel, you can see most of it. I have the right side framed by buildings that are in the foreground, and they're in heavy shadow. The middle ground is the factory, where we're going to be entering and seeing the second panel. And then the background, we have more buildings, more futuristic buildings. We've got some flying cars, and if I were coloring this, and I'm not sure if I'm going to use some ink wash, but if I were coloring this, I would definitely have more, open space that has smokestacks. Looks like they're coming from far off in the distance, where we don't have line art to make it a focus. It's just part of the ambient scenery. What I decided to do was use the negative space right here and create a wedge shape. Okay. And what I'm doing is our vanishing point, you can see these arrows that I drew here, is over here. And what I'm doing is bringing the reader's view from the upper left to the lower right. And what I did here was, is instead of having necessarily something really easy to transition you back, I sort of tweaked the angle of the panels to sort of slide you along. And you'll see if we get to this portion, all the different organic shapes that I use to try to weave you back over this way. But we're going to just work on the top panel, and it's going to be, a lot of mechanical drawing. But one of the things I warned Jeff about is that I am terrible with robots. I'm terrible with using transformers. When people ask me to draw transformers, I generally try to talk them out of it because I'm just terrible at it. But what I do in this, yes, I said do. What I do is try to create more organic, just clutter. I think of like Mobius and a lot of heavy metal and their sort of dystopian futures where they had just like junk and things that you can identify. Like, as we work on this building, you'll see some of that where I've taken things that exist in our time and try to just weave them in and out so that if someone's looking at this, yes, they see a building, but if they look closer, they'll see like, oh, there's sort of like some piping and some windows and some things, some cues that kind of bring them back that tie us to that future. I might actually lighten this a little bit so that you can see the pencil marks a little better. Get down some. There you go. So when I did all of the grids and stuff for this in Photoshop, as I said when I was designing this wedge, my main vanishing point for the viewer is off to the right here. But I also have two other vanishing points, one well below the horizon, one above the horizon, and then one off to the other side in order to have your perspective. And for me, what I'm also thinking about is this is my light source. So I even draw it on my pages, not just like my pinups. I'll draw the little X that tells me that's my light source, so I need to be cognizant of that. So I'm thinking textures and I'm thinking lighting on everything that I'm doing for this page. Right now I'm drawing like what looks like almost like a garbage tube coming out of the side of this building. It's going to be kind of a ribbed tube. You see those in the movies sometimes. Some of those movies from the 80s with like construction sites. But this is more like instead of me doing like a big performance to have like a piece to give away, this is more like hanging out in my studio while I'm working. Because this is a book called Planet Comics, and Jeff McClellan is going to be putting it out a little later this year. Not sure when it's going up, but I believe he's kickstarting it. And you'll be sure that I'll be pushing it on Facebook. Now, the dimensions of his book are a little different than a standard comic book, but it shouldn't be too noticeable, at least in the original artwork, because what I always do is I draw it as large as I can with as much extra bleed space as I can for stuff, and then I'll tweak it to whatever their template is. And he already sent that to me, and I probably should have already set it to that, but by having extra space, if he wanted to take this panel and use the city as like a header for Facebook or something else, like it has more uses that he can take it for. And that's kind of what I want to do when I'm working on stuff that is going to be for Kickstarters or independent projects or for self-publishing. You want to try to give as much use as possible for any image. And in this case, like I wanted to do this big 2-page spread because I don't get too many opportunities to do that. And I just thought that based on his description, like in the next panel, when we get to that part in the script, he says that like one of the production lines goes on forever. And in order to like really do that, I wanted to push it as far as I could. Now see, I'm being cognizant light source. And even though this is just like a garbage chute that nobody's going to notice, I'm going to detail it in as I want it to be. Everything coming through okay? Anybody? Is it bugging out on anybody? No. Well, there's 80 watching. I suppose I could check over on Facebook. Let me check the event. It looks like it's still coming in relatively clear. But I'm going to keep moving because it's going to take me a while to get through this top panel because of all this stuff going on. And, it's got a lot of stuff. Even when I shrink stuff down, I know that I overdraw it. But it's for my buddy Jeff. I would like people to. I saw some of the other stuff that's already in the book, and I got to bring my A game because it's got some really good stuff in it. And we have a new story coming out in the Free Comic Day issue of The Tick. That'll be coming out in May, first weekend in May. Hopefully. Awesome. Thanks, guys. I'm happy to do it, Jeff. And you can edit as we go, actually, because Jeff's the editor of this one as well as the writer. And I'm sorry, I was covering that up. Also, I'm behind, so I've got to really kick myself in the butt to get everything done for him. Hopefully this week I'll be done with everything, even though I think I'm just penciling and inking, so it should be okay. It's just kind of depressed and drawn like crap the last few days. That's what happens when I fight robots. But if we can get through this top panel tonight, I'll feel real good. It's not that I hate it. I'm just really bad at it. I wish I was better at it. I wish I could draw it like P. Craig Russell or one of those just amazing artists. There's other artists that are like architecture people before they get into comics. Made me think I should have done that instead of drawing people. Hey, thanks, Bert, man. And we'll do a time lapse of it, and hopefully, I'll be able to show some of the inking on this page because it's the first page, so there's no spoilers. What I'll probably do is pencil this and pencil the other ones, and then maybe ink this one on a stream this weekend or something. Because the penciling part, while you get to see some of the stuff come together, I always feel like it doesn't pop until the inks come down on it. Well, then, if it's 10,000 more robots, it'll be copy and paste robot backgrounds. We're trying to get a guest celebrity letterer on this story, so. I'll go bug him next week. He didn't call me today for once, which was odd, so he must have been busy. All right, I have to keep thinking because that's how I get through stuff. I'm wondering if me talking through this is going to help me, but we'll see. Sometimes I get lost in my own head, and I have to keep focused like light source, angle. Hey, thanks, Jessica. I was looking at, I think part of my issue is I look at how much better everybody else is at drawing these sorts of things. Like I'll be like, oh, I need sci-fi buildings, and then this just ridiculous Mobius 2-page spread comes up. But with this being the focus, obviously I don't think Jeff wants it to just say robots on the thing. I just put that there because it's going to be a sign. I'm going to put the most detail here, and you're going to have the most open space here and the most closed space on those two buildings in the foreground. But I really appreciate Jeff letting me do this on the stream because it would something different, you know. And I honestly think I'm better at pages than I am pinups and covers. Although I was working on 2 cover layouts today, which is just bizarre to me. Now the name of the city in this is Henry Ford City, and the year is 2495. And as I was first laying this out, I was wondering, because there's such little text on here, I wanted each text box to have kind of like a spot that makes real good sense and actually helps with the storytelling that they're doing. Obviously, it has them, you know, with the panel, but I wanted to set up the spot in the panel for the pieces of text because there's so little of it. And I believe that obviously upper left is the way to start with the first one, but then I actually wanted the next one to be at the transition between these 2 panels. Because I think it's actually another way to help direct the eye, because it would have been very easy to go, you know, box, box, and then, you know, you skip over this stuff. Sometimes when I'm really fighting a panel layout, I'll show it to someone who doesn't read comic books. And if they can understand what's going on and read the page, that means I've done my job. And you might ask why I'm not using a ruler for all this stuff. It's because I'll rule the necessary lines to the vanishing points, those parallels that help bring your eye through. While I'm inking right now, I've just got to keep going and work my way through it. And since this is a light source, you're going to have, you know, a fair amount of dark areas. I don't know if I'll use flat blacks, and I'll be interested to know. Well, maybe I'll ask Jeff about the colorists, because some colorists prefer just leaving them open, and they can use like purples and all kinds of fancy coloring devices to make me look better than I am. I raised the camera up a little, so if this is better, we can do this in the future. For those that are just here for the signed comics and the small sketch, it'll be, I've got some tick comics and I've got some little, they're actually 4x9 sketches. I've been cutting 9x12 boards into thirds and doing quick sketches on those in the morning. Because for years I've just been doing quick little warm-ups on like copy paper just to get the feet moving, and you know, I've just found out that that's not productive. And you're going to see me freehand, like I said, this whole panel. And when I go back to ink is when I'm going to go in, because I already laid down all the grids underneath, so I know that they're approximately right. They're going to be close. So when I bring them back to the grid, the inking, they should be pretty plumb. Some people don't like to use rulers for their buildings and stuff, but I'm just not capable. I think Woodall told me he didn't use rulers after he penciled. Light source. And what's going to happen, because these are 3 smokestacks that are relatively the same size, and they are actually like intermittently descending on this building and getting further away from the viewer, you're actually going to see less of the shadow on each one of these, even though they're the same shape. You'll see almost part of the back here, and you don't want to create a tangent, so you might over scrape it a little bit. And then there's about half of it, and then there's about a quarter of it. And that actually helps create that illusion of depth a little bit more. At least that's what they tell me. Those fancy books. I've got a very nice little art fest happening this weekend at the Narrows in Fall River. There's beer tasting, there's local food, local artists. Craig Rousseau and I will be there, and trying to get the J. Kennedy to pop down. Craig will be in his studio with all his fancy studio things and his nice couch, and I'll be at a table down the hallway. You can see parallel lines. Straight lines, parallel lines are just something that people pick up immediately when they're looking at a page. Like, you can have as many organic, flowy things out of perspective as you want, basically, as long as there's enough of them. You can fudge it and get away with stuff, but as soon as you introduce those mechanical lines, you got to get them right, because people know what those look like. I think that's why most audiences are fairly forgiving about anatomy issues and stuff like that. As long as there's enough energy and detail and busyness, you can get away with some bad stuff. And I absolutely have. If you look real closely at this year's, sweet. Well, free beer, it's pretty nice, and Troy City Brewery does some nice stuff. They keep telling me they have a red ale, but I've never had it. I hope they have it at some point so I can give it a try. I don't drink a lot of beer, but I like to drink nice beers once in a while. I'm doing the same thing here as we did here. As far as the shading goes, you're going to see less shading as it goes further away. You don't want to put the same amount of shading on each smokestack, otherwise you're going to lose your depth. So actually, I think I put too much on it. This is my little electric eraser. Forgive the noise. Those things are great. So I know it seems frivolous, but when it comes to quick fixes, especially if you use a dark pencil like I do, it's very helpful. To me, one of the daunting things about science fiction is just because I love science fiction so much, and I'm so aware of so many that have shown up in pop culture, is just trying to do things that are different. And it can be maddening, because you could think you have an idea and then you draw it and then you're like, oh crap, I've seen that before. And then there it is in like one random scene in The Running Man or something. The dentist drill noise on penciling pages night is not often, but it comes with the territory. Now, when I was drawing this and coming up with it, I was thinking of, like, while it's pouring this stuff out, I would think that there'd be caps with some sort of device that they think filters it. I also wanted to have some sort of dark metal to break up all the light metal that's here. And again, same thing. We're going to have less and less. In this case, we'll actually have more. We want less here, a little bit more. And then we lose this little eye highlight on this one entirely, and that just becomes the end. And do I know how all of this stuff works? No, and actually in panel 2 it gets even worse. I intentionally made that panel as busy and indecipherably technological as possible to try to fudge, just like I said earlier, more of an organic basis for the technology, or that there's just so much that it looks like it's almost becoming organic again, after you see all these things. Like if you see a pile of wires, it can look like, a plant, And that's kind of what I was going for in panel 2, along with these, robots that are getting assembled. This part was kind of stupid, but I just kind of liked it. Was I put an outdoor staircase on this one tower. I don't know why. I just did. These are little windows. Because it's round, one of them will be higher than the next one. And again, when this is shrunk down to this, is anyone going to notice that? I don't know. I mean, maybe the colorist will put a little light in there and it'll pop. I'm considering adding some ink wash just to help with some of my light sourcing, but again, I don't know if that would. Some colorists don't want you to add any sort of tones. It's a team project. I want to be a team player. Down here's the panel line. You can't really see it. I was hoping to have time to ink in at least the border lines, but I didn't. Even though we made a pretty simple meal, what I had to do was my normal setup here for the streaming is actually on top of some comic book boxes, so it's a little higher up than before. But here, I'll turn the light on so you can see the progress. But you can see it's got way more detail. It's got a lot more going on, and it's way more solid than that original layout, at least hopefully, unless my brain is lying to me. It does that. And there's some stuff I can't do with the piece behind it, so I do have to turn the light off, at some point. Like when we get to the end, I'll probably go through and detail it out. I'm forever jealous of the people that don't need to do all the construction lines, because I'm sure that adds, years onto my drawings that other people don't have to do. Now here's something that I can actually do with some confidence, and that's actually like the smoke coming out. And the only smoke that I wanted to have any true black in it was the smoke coming out of the main factory. And I wanted it to have a very three-dimensional, billowy look to it so that it didn't look like steam. Steam has kind of like these long, wavy lines. Smoke tends to have these big chunks. They look almost like popcorn kernels. And again, being mindful of our light source, where there are shadows, these big popcorn kernels that are kind of glued together. That's generally how I describe doing black smoke. Sorry if my hand keeps getting in the way. It's a nervous tick. Still not used to these things yet, but I'm glad that it's coming through and you can see it. Last time, for whatever reason, I had to go through Facebook. And we do think it was a problem with the browser, actually, strangely enough. I am a novice with all of this, so I appreciate people bearing with us as we try to make these things better. But we don't want to make them too good. Be like that part of Wayne's World where they have the heavily produced Wayne's World going on cable television. It's just odd. I had some friends of mine that I saw at the South Coast show that said they have all kinds of podcasts and stuff, and they said that they could take my stream and put it on their stream and tweet it out to all their people. And I was just like, that sounds great. I just know nothing about that stuff, but I'm learning. a lot of talk about Emerald City going on right now, everything. And I wasn't going to Emerald City, but I do remember back, and it's a story I've told at conventions because people around here brought it up, and it comes up every now and again, was during the Boston Marathon bombings, there was a Boston Comic-Con that was being held the weekend of the big manhunt through the city when they were finding those two people. And Jay Kennedy was over at my place, just we were sitting on the floor watching the news. And then it came through on the phone that they were going to postpone the show. And what ended up happening was very interesting, was that you had all these comic book guests that were already in town. It wasn't like it was canceled, long enough out that people made other plans. And what ended up happening was it was almost like a citywide comic convention because everybody found a store to go do a signing at. Like Frank Cho was at one place. The store that I actually ended up going to was where Carlos Pacheco went, and Carlos Pacheco was there, and Nick Bradshaw was there. Thanks, Allison. It was at Friendly Neighborhood Comics, and it was funny, like I'd never met Pacheco, and I was always a big fan. And Jay was like, "Oh, I'm just going to call up the store, and make sure everything's is what it seems like online." And the owner was, giving out table space at his store, and Jay was like, "Hey, you want a table at the store?" So we ended up tabling there. And I wound up sitting next to Carlos, like around the corner from him. And I got to, pick his brain a little bit at the store. I tried not to be too annoying, but you remember that time when you drew X-Men? That was awesome. So you can see, like I described those popcorn kernels, like I have the heavy shadow. If you were to actually three-dimensionally map them out, they almost look like they're getting bigger. Like if you had a little small kernel, and then the next one was a little bigger, and a little bigger, and a little bigger. And you just work them all the way out. And that's kind of how I draw black smoke. The one thing that I tend to add to these dystopian future scenes is not an over-reliance on solar power. And it's just a choice because I always tell myself, like, yeah, that would be great, but then like there'd be all this pollution. Yeah, we were talking about the Boston Comic-Con when it was canceled. Yeah, they just because of all the talk of Emerald City and people passing on going out there, it's the only time I've ever done a show that was canceled for any reason. And it was moved to later that summer. It was, I think almost everybody came back too that was scheduled to go. Back in the old days when Jimmy and Jackie ran the show. It was different times. Like I don't even think they had all that many celebrity guests, so it's not like they had a ton of money wrapped up in guarantees or anything that they would lose out on if the show got canceled. Now, this was my only solar panel that I had planned to show is like part of this, and I have it vertical, just as a visual thing to help reinforce this line, and also to just help make these smokestacks stick out a little more because there will be a cast shadow on them. Now, this is not going to be solid black because it's and this will not, because these are all made out of concrete, so I'll texture those in. This will be sort of like a cross-hatched, like gunmetal, and then this will be smooth black. So there's actually like 3 layers of different blacks to try to help pull it forward. Like I said, this part was to be the most detailed from the beginning. And this is just doing backgrounds, My first job in comics was drawing backgrounds, so like anytime I have a city or something like that, I am very conscious about them because I've had to. My first gig was actually drawing backgrounds for a guy who refused to draw backgrounds. So I had to take finished artwork and figure out how the backgrounds would fit into the drawn pieces. So what I had to do was sometimes I would have to do an overlay on a figure and then grid it out and then find out where the vanishing points were based on the figure instead of eyeballing it. You know, it's kind of the reverse of building a page where you would normally start with your vanishing points and everything and then build the figure in the space that way. But because I was handed figures just floating in space, I had to come up with a way to go backwards. Oops, that was my tape falling down. All right, we've got most of the building in here. And it's very likely that I'll add paneling to it. It's another way to add sort of an organic, high-techy feel to it. I did it in a book called Argonauts, and I actually think it was one of the more successful ways to add depth to like these metallic surfaces. It's to create like these. You stick to your vanishing point, like you're not losing it, but you kind of eyeball it and fudge it and create these like little panels that stick out, kind of like that. You can't see it. You can start to see these little boxes, you know, and you can just add them wherever you think you need to have more of a focus. Is that common for someone to just do the backgrounds? I don't know if it's common, but it is something that exists. Like I know some guys that just have a really great background person, like very famously, Dave Sim on Cerebus. Gerhard did all the backgrounds, like all those beautiful buildings. Like if you've ever seen Dave Sim's pencils, like he would give you like the location of the building and like the edges of the buildings, but Gerhard would just go in and he would draw all the archways and the beautiful Victorian stuff. And it was just incredible work. And some other artists have background guys. Like what's more common is for someone to have an inker that has a background inker. I've even encountered someone who has a background figure penciler. I mean, everybody works differently, but I would say for a first job, it was difficult, but it was good. Yep, that's right, Allison, because they work in close-knit teams. Now here we have these foreground buildings. This looks almost too much like a lighthouse, so what I might do is add a little bit to it. What I wanted to do was just to create another way to have just an interesting silhouette, because I wanted to break up the space in the foreground, and I also wanted to draw the eye as it comes across to have heavy contrast and some detail, especially on this edge, because again, light source here, and I'm actually having this as a curved edge. So there will not be a shine, like a highlight on this edge because it's a curved building. And how we define that is with the windows, because what's over here says something about what's over there. It's the same thing with drawing a person. Like when, one hand is closer and you only see like this part of it, this hand that's further away and smaller, you see the rest of the hand. So in a way, you're defining this hand by showing more information with this hand. This is how my brain thinks. Like, I promise you, not everyone draws like this. I'd be surprised if anyone outside of someone that had similar teachers that I had draws like this, especially in comics. But like I said, I'm freehanding. Most guys would be going ruler happy, but I think that would be really boring for you guys to watch. Hey, Michael, how you been? I'm going to go back in with the inks and I'll define, like, you're going to see here that there's some parallel lines and some stuff that absolutely needs to be ruled in. Now, because of the angle of all these lines and how you find your vanishing point, our horizon line is below the edge of most of the panel. There's a little edge over here, but most of the panel, so you're actually going to be seeing underneath, like if we were to draw a grid out from our horizon line and our vanishing point, and you were to square it out, that would be the cube of the front of this building. I'm just roughing it so you can see it a little bit. That's how the cube would be, and then you'd cut your circle out of that cube. And as you can see, I already did that digitally, but I'm just explaining it to you if you were to try to do this longhand. And it would take, much longer because I would have to draw a cube for this, a cube here, even though I can draw a full one. I'm doing all right, Michael. I'm doing better now that the stream is actually going as we had intended for it, unlike last week. So seriously, I just immediately as soon as we got out of it, I shut the thing off, cracked open a beer, and was like, well, couldn't go any worse. Now here's where I'm kind of eyeballing some of the edges of the windows, because if you do them precisely if you were to grid it out, if you do them precisely, you're actually going to create a tangent with the edge of the building. So some places I eyeball things to avoid creating tangents, because there were times when I would take my portfolio to editors at conventions and they'd say, well, this is a tangent. And then I'd show them, I would take out a piece of paper and, show them that that's where, because the vanishing points took it, that's how it looks. And then they tell me I should have put the vanishing point somewhere else. And, they're right, but I tend to fudge some of the vanishing points just so that it's dynamic and adds to the storytelling, because I am not a realist. I never will be. It's not my strong suit. I don't use enough photo reference to be, in this market, a realist in comics. I do have one project coming up that I'm going to have to use photo reference for like every panel, because it's got a likeness in it and I am just dreading it. But thus far they haven't gotten their crap together. I want a little less detail and just more open shapes here, so that you're creating bigger areas of contrast, and hopefully that helps with this giant open white area against this completely black background. Anchor this side of the shot. And you can see I'm creating a curve, and I will use something like this, like a French curve, to come back in and just do a much smoother line. Like I said, we're just roughing it in so that we can get through panel one, and you can just kind of see how I work. I actually think that that's off. Yeah, I'm going to have to fix that. But in order for you to see what I'm doing, I am going to fill this in, so forgive the time that it takes. I wish I had one of those just big chunks of, graphite. But we'll see what time it is, and look, if we get through the panel, I'll at least draw one of the robots for you so you can see what the character looks like. I tried to make him the description called for like a more boring version of Scud, and I tried to make him have a little bit of personality, just a little bit, and I made him asymmetrical so that he's fun to draw. I have to think a little bit more. Symmetrical suits, I get lazy. I just do. I wish I didn't, but I do. And I will mess them up, and it'll just be obvious. But if I get some asymmetry in there, it really helps me get through it. Now these flying cars, I wanted them to kind of look like bugs. So I gave them kind of like these beetle coverings to their like rocket boosters, and then I did a couple other ones that are just kind of like generic flying cars, because when this is shrunk down, like right now these are about the size of a penny. When they're shrunk down, they're pretty much just going to be, you know, a speck with like a streak of light coming behind them. But, you know, I'll fill them in. And when I drew these, I did draw, you know, just a little box that goes to our, at least in the same direction of our line of sight that we wanted. Thanks, Uncle Bill. How's things where you are? Got a little blurry. I found that if I leave something on the paper, it tends to focus a little better. So if you see something that's in the way like that, at least that's what I found my camera can handle. That sounds pretty good, Bill. It was sunny today and it was warmer than before, but obviously nothing like you guys got down there. Obviously with flying cars, I tend to think of like the Jetsons and Blade Runner, and to a certain extent like those little pods in Star Trek, like the first one. I try to take what we think of as a plausible flying car and make little changes to it. 80 with a breeze. That sounds terrible. Kind of gave it like these hammerhead front. But in order to make it a little more three-dimensional, I'll give it just a little bit of spotted black here. There. Now these beetle wings were a little tricky. I'm guessing Jeff hated them, but he's a nice guy, so he didn't say anything. I was just thinking of natural shapes that are aerodynamic and that we can picture in our brains flying. And I always just think that when beetles like open up the carapace with those little wings, they're just cool looking. So that's kind of the direction I was like, you know, if we're already at the implausible moment of flying cars, why can't they look like those like big dopey beetles? I had one more right there. You'll see me add random crap just to make sure that I don't forget. This one looks like an electric shaver, actually, now that I look at it. The point of my array of my flying cars is to just keep pointing people this way. Like when the colorist does this, I would want like a tapering, disappearing exhaust coming off of this one, and the one up here, and this one here, so that all the lines are parallel coming here. Yes, absolutely. If someone else was inking this, I would be using the ruler at this point, but because I'm inking it, I'm using the ruler at the next point. And also I have the added bonus of being able to go back in digitally and square up anything that needs to be squared up. It also lets me move a lot quicker, so you guys can actually see the seam, and I can talk you through it. Like, I was pretty pleased with uh, this wedge shape for the negative space. So I want you guys to see that as a finished thing, and then we'll draw one of the robots, and then that's what we'll call it a night. But yeah, if I was going to send it to, Joe or anybody that I know to ink it, I would be absolutely embarrassed if I sent them what I was going to ink, and I would also like have to pay them for what I would consider finishing instead of just inking. Although Joe actually tends to like pencils that are a little more open, which is kind of cool. He inked a Paul Pelletier Hulk Thor piece recently, and he sent me the pencils. And Pelletier pencils pretty tightly, like quite tightly, obviously since he's DC guy, DC Marvel guy. But I absolutely saw Joe through that picture. Like I saw his style, his touch, especially in like the face, the eyes. There are some people that actually go like fully the opposite way, Jonathan, where they don't rule anything, and they will come in. I think a fella that does the robot book where it's all just these really wild lines. I know that there's a book called Scrimshaw out there where the artists use just really big open lines and lots of just scratchy small lines to define the shapes, but like none of them are ruled at all. And it has this very naturalistic look to it. And I guess you could really just have to commit to one or the other. Like if you can do like the mechanical lines perfectly and you can create that just sense of geometry, then you stick to it. Or if you can really go that organic route, like maybe I should try that, but I don't know if this would be the appropriate project for that. But we're coming along. I'll take a look. You can see we're focusing in. Like I said, I would have a tapering stream coming off of each of these, just directing you this way. And this will be all blocked off. There will be a nice bright light on this side and dark on this side. All of this will be, everything that's on the left of this building will be basically blacked out, hopefully making it three-dimensional, especially with the different cuts on the building, like this second floor going above this floor will just sort of create another layer. And then this little box on the roof creates another layer. It did. It did. And, I was reading it for a while and then, I stopped. You can only afford so many books. And I've been defaulting to a lot of dollar bins lately. But I'd like to say hi to whoever our one Twitch viewer is. I'm glad that it's working. If I were doing this for someone else to ink, like here's just a quick straight edge that, come in, we angle things off. I don't think this is fun to watch, but maybe it is. Got our finishing points. if one vanishing point is here, we're going to have one back over here. That's why. This goes back. Now, like over here, which we have lots of dark and just a little bit of light, we're going to go lots of light and a little bit of dark on this side to try to create 3 layers of shading in this one cityscape. Now, whether I do it right, you know, that's debatable, but that was the intent. You know, you're not going to be able to see much of the left of these buildings. You'll see the left of this one. You'll see a few little bits peppered throughout, and then this is just all dark. So it gets progressively darker until you get to here. And that's just with the line art, you know, that's not taking into account whatever the color scheme will be. Honestly, I don't even know what I would do if I were coloring it. I would probably just use a really simple warm, cool contrast. I would use really cool colors on the foreground, really warm colors on the background, and I actually might use like a olivey green that transforms into like a yellow, like a green sky, so it creates a different mood. So it looks polluted. Dollar bins are where it's at. Jonathan knows. We found some good stuff at the South Coast show. Now, one of my things that I use that's kind of a cheat for doing all your vertical parallel lines is one of these rulers that has the grid printed right on it and it's transparent. So like we have our vertical lines here. Like this is one of my cheats because that's just how I am with buildings. See how we have our 2 main lines of this archway? Because we have lines printed every 1/8 of an inch on this, we can do our vertical lines on this building very quickly and very accurately. You draw the line, you move it over, and then you line up the line on top of it. And boom, there you have all your verticals for this part, and they're ruled correctly. Now you do need to eyeball it a little bit with your perspective, just because they're not, this is a flat grid. So if you just move it a tiny bit, you'll get it there. But here we are, we've got our vanishing point here. I also don't like everything to be too perpendicular. So one of the things I did on this piece was to have like a mosaic window. I tend to eyeball some of the lines just because what I'll do is I'm just gonna, so that my again, this is just getting organic shapes that clash with the man-made ones. And again, like someone's going to flip through and they're not going to see it. And who knows, the colorist might dislike it, or Jeff might be like, hey, lose those cracked looking windows. But I just wanted it to be something that separated that building out some way visually, other than just doing different shaped windows, or different sized windows, which I just find endlessly boring. Like I said, we're just going to have a little bit of a shadow on each of the left-hand side of everything over here. We don't want anything on the right because this is where our light source is. Part of me saying that is just to remind myself. So don't take it like I'm saying you personally or anything. But these rulers with the grids printed on them, they've saved me so much time over the years. Obviously the tick fights a lot in the city, so you have to draw the city. If you look at like some of these covers for Batman, like I saw, was it Jorge Jimenez's new Batman cover out? He absolutely spent an exorbitant more amount of time drawing all the little buildings in the background than he spent on Batman and Catwoman, just by the real estate that it takes up. I mean, obviously they could have spent a great amount of time on the pose and the gesture and everything else, but when you look at all those tiny little windows and everything, it's just it took a lot of time and hard work to make that cover, and it came out beautiful. So. Well, I'm happy to having you get your pencils and paper out. I'm not really good at giving lessons, I don't think, but I can at least tell you what I've failed at doing and have figured out has been approved by someone else over time. I'm not going to say it succeeded because I'm always finding something else wrong with my work. What I'm doing over on the left-hand side here is mostly like an exhaust port for this one building off to the left here, and I wanted it to be kind of gross and rusted. That's why you're seeing me use like even more like choppier lines. I guess I would make this portion more rusted, because the lower buildings I think were built around the same time, and then like the higher up buildings that are almost floating in the air are like newer. That's not a new concept. That's something that like Fifth Element had an entire city below their city. This is just more like when you look at the Boston skyline, you can tell which buildings are the new buildings, and it kind of shows the age of the city. You can also see that I draw fairly hard with a pencil, and that's why when you see my originals, you can see the pencils underneath the inks when I ink on top of them. And I think we'll actually have, because of this, a cast shadow right there. So it's right up against it. And again, anytime we have one of these edges of a building, I have to make sure that that points to our vanishing point. Even if you're faking your perspective, which we're really not, because I did the grids, digitally. But even if you decide to do, a mountain scene or trees or whatever, it helps to set up those visual cues within those organic shapes. Some people can do it intuitively. I cannot. I have to grid it out. And I used to grid it on the page, and that just like destroyed the paper, and then I'd have to ink it on a separate sheet for everyone, and it was just taking even longer. Hey, David. I think so. I think I'll be at San Diego this year. There's been talk of it with New England Comics, and I hope I get to. The folks at San Diego Comic-Con are actually one of the reasons why I wanted to get back to doing these, is because people were coming up to me from different parts of the world saying, "Hey, we watched your thing." I'm thinking to myself, I taped a camera to a mirror. But thank you. And now we're back, and it hopefully is a little better. There's not a ton of light because I still have to see through it. But once we get through like chunking it out, I'm going to turn it off, and then I'll show you where we're at. Actually, because I screwed up on this building, I have to use the ruler. This building, I was thinking about a water cooler that I used to own. I know, these are just stupid things that like someone's going to look at this panel for 10 seconds and be like, yep, it's the future, and then on to the story. But I at least want to get the shadows in so you can see the main gist of it. Yeah, obviously, if everything works out and I'm at San Diego, the NEC booth has been in the same place for I think over 10 years, so you'll know where to find me. Try very hard not to create tangents, and sometimes they're inevitable, so that to the point where I have to like blow up what I'm drawing and start over. But I think I ran into most of those problems already and solved most of them. There was actually one time where I had an editor tell me I needed to use more photos for my cities, and I was very young, and I was like, sure, yes, absolutely. So the next year, I took a photograph of a city, and I literally just traced the sucker. I traced it, and I put a superhero in front of it, and that's kind of standard operating procedure for some artists these days. But back then, I don't know if it was, but they've been doing it a long time. They've used photo backgrounds, all kinds of stuff. But anyway, it's not important. What was funny is I went back to the same guy with my portfolio with my traced cityscape, and he just looked at me and said, "This isn't a city. You need to go learn how to draw cities." And I never went back to that booth again, because it seemed like that was just a canned thing that he told people to get us to go away. I'd rather he just be like, yeah, your stuff's not up to snuff, kid. Which it wasn't, and it would have been absolutely true for them to say it. Yeah, David, there will be a new Free Comic Book Day issue. From what I'm told, they're already printed. I have not seen one yet, but I was told by the kind folks at NEC that it's printed and that there's some at one of the stores. Most of the orders should already have been in for local comic stores. I think the cutoff was a while ago. But I'll have some at whatever table I'm at. So if your store runs out, you can always stop by my booth. Now, here was an important one to actually grid out, was the rest of this building, because I'm just going to have horizontal windows in this one so that it helps point you this way. Creates that gridding effect. And the beauty of it is this one, you don't have to measure it out. As long as all the lines are pointing this way, it will get the desired effect. Like, you can create all kinds of elaborate patterns and stuff if you want to, but I'm a simple man. And like I've said, someone's going to look at this panel and say, yep, it's the future. Next panel. And if they do that, then I've done my job. Now here's something that I don't know if you'll notice, but I created that same parallel line with just the heights of these antennae. And they're not attached to the building. They're just kind of floating. And there's a little light on top of them. So each one of these will be, illuminated. And if we're back at San Diego, I would assume that they would want to do a new San Diego issue. I've heard it mentioned, but I don't know if anything has been finalized or announced or if it's official, but there have been talks of it, so. If you hear my cat, he's probably, he's coming in. That's what Penny does. Actually, because this page is going to be shrunk down so much, I'm going to go in and darken in a few of these bars. Just like that, so that it's just more obvious when it's shrunk down what it is. I think I did a stream for Jeff's other book, the Black Terror one. He got some amazing artists to work on that one. If you guys haven't seen it, he probably still has some copies that you can pick up. It's got Ramona Fraden, Aquaman legend, DC legend, co-creator of Metamorpho in it. Mr. Alan Weiss did a beautiful piece. Bronze Age master that worked at Continuity, Marvel, DC. Co-created Deadly Nightshade and God, what were the other characters that I read on it? He has a big long list of characters. Created a bunch for Valiant. He did the first Kiss comic book. That's pretty funny. Let's take a look at what we got so far. Here you can see the pretty rough pencils of our cityscape, as I had originally talked about. I mean, and there's going to be little bits that I tweak as we go along, just because that's how obsessive I'll get with this stuff. But you get the gist of it, is I want everything to be bringing the eye this way, even though I have a panel going up in this direction. And what I want to do is have you coming down from left to right. You hit this edge of this panel, and then it starts to bring you naturally back down this way. And everything that's going on in the next panel, it's just absolute, like, crazy conveyor belts of robots just woven like a basket. But that's going to take me hours to draw, and I don't want to keep you guys here all night. So what I'm going to do next is just bring up one of our little robots so you can see what they look like. Let me get a piece of paper so that it's not causing a glare. As you can see here, there's a row of robots just ready for inspection or transfer. They're to go into action. I'm going to turn up the board all the way. Put this here so hopefully you don't lose focus. Hey, thanks, Craig. I love sequential pages, and honestly, I'm a lot more comfortable and I think better at doing sequential pages than I am doing pinups and covers and stuff. But let's talk about the robot. Now, I tend to think of like the hallmarks of a classic Jeff McClellan tale, having a lot of heart. And I have questions about this story, just to, if it's me projecting onto the robot or what the psychology is behind it. But I'm sure he has all that stuff figured out. And I gave him like a tin can head, just to keep it real simple. Also, that way, like when it's moving at different angles, you can easily create depth, because it's just a cylinder. If you're drawing a cylinder this way, or if you're drawing a cylinder from above, anybody knows what a tin can looks like. So it's something that they can identify with. And in this case, I have them standing in front of these boxes, which end up being the cases that these robots get transported in. And they all have a designation and actually a viewing window in the front where it's like a crack between the doors so that, they can be inspected without having to open it. At least that was my mindset. And I also designed them so that they have just easy shapes to reproduce, but I think that they're a little fun to draw. And I have the light source behind me. And everything on this is metallic, so you're going to be rendering texture. So it's kind of tough to see. You'll be able to see it better once we flip the light off, but, think of the most basic metallic textures that you've seen in comics. The ones that immediately come to mind for me are like the Bob Layton, Tony Stark Iron Man suit, where he has all those great little glimmers and, rim lighting and everything. I went with a kaleidoscopic neck that has segments in it. And the segments will actually help me later on with something that eventually ends up being there. And it's also like comic book shorthand, like the segments on Colossus. I always think about like those segments. He's my favorite X-Man, so whenever I think of metal, thinking of the John Byrne Colossus segments. Now, when I was trying to come up with the sketches of this robot, honestly, like, I did 2 or 3 designs and they were just completely wrong for the story. I drew a big giant robot that was more shaped like a just because I think it's robot gorilla is cool. And I did another one where he was like even more monstrous, and I was trying to like design the robots to each do a different job. So I asked Jeff a couple of questions, clarified for me, and said, nope, these are utilitarian robots. They can't be scary. So to me, that says they can't be like these giant robots walking down the street. So what I did was I shrank them and I took the different things that I was designing these other robots to do and kind of turned them into like a Swiss Army knife where like they had different parts that did different things. Because instead of having a different robot for different jobs, I thought each robot would need different tools for different jobs. And is that true? No, but it made sense logically and from a visual storytelling point to me, because later in the story you see the robots doing stuff and they're doing different jobs. So I wanted a way to, at least in my brain, explain visually them doing these different things and being capable of doing it with a visual. Now, like, in all honesty, like if we created a robot that could do all these things, they would probably be in some sort of a housing and you wouldn't see all the different stuff that they can do all the time. But I wanted to have a visual cue right away that says, wow, these guys can do different stuff. Which is why you'll see I drew one of the arms considerably larger, which is I made one arm for strength and one arm for speed. And I actually tried to make little servos so that you could see, like maybe sort of like the inside of a watch when you see the different springs and stuff. And I also put some unnecessary cuts in things. And each robot has a designation, so I put their name tag actually on the main rotor of their big arm, because I just thought that that would be the most logical place to put it, and it would be visually striking, like you could see like that's its number right there from far away. And there's going to be some halftones that I have to do because it's metal, so I'm going to go with single direction lines instead of cross-hatching to try to denote that. Now, as I'm designing this robot, I also think, well, it's got one giant arm, so it's going to be lopsided. And it's going to have a weight distribution problem. And that's been one of the big problems with these bipedal robots that they've been trying to build. So what I did was I put the power source on the opposite side, inside the main rib cage area, to try to act as the counterweight. So at least visually, when you see it walking, there's kind of a reason why it's not hanging to one side, because batteries are heavy. If you've ever held like a car battery or whatever, they're heavy. There's one little wire that sticks out of the back of his head. And I put stripes on it because I think it's cute. And there's a scene later where we see them charging. So what I did was I created I have a couple of things where the wire it actually recedes into the object. It actually like springs back in. So this is actually will come out and plug into. There's a wire that comes out they'll be able to plug into their charging stations with. Now all this doesn't matter if people don't think it looks kind of cool. So hopefully, it doesn't look like an old dude who watched Lost in Space too much designed it. But I tried to keep it really quite simple outside of those items. Now there's another robot in the front of this one, but I'm going to draw in the other arm just so that you can see it, and I can just erase it when I finish the row. That way you can see the whole character. Now the other thing that I looked up was how this is just ridiculous. How the hip sockets work for these bipedal robots, and it's not too different from humans where they're actually at an angle. So and they move in like a ball and socket joint. So I created like a disc just so that it's easy to draw visually that can move. And it has like, you can see the ball joint in it. Hope everybody's having a good week so far. wife's going out of town, so I'll probably be doing an extra stream this weekend just for the hell of it. Now, you'll see the edge of my original sketch is here, and then the edge of the panel's here. This happens sometimes when I mismeasure, or if I have extra space. And like I said, if Jeff can use the extra space to make this a multi-purpose image, if he can use it for an announcement for the Kickstarter or whatever, that's the whole thing. I'll make it as useful as I can. With 3 fingers, just because I think that's the minimum necessary. It's really simple. That's our robot, you know. I didn't want it to be too complex, and you know, I was originally going in the wrong direction, but take a look at him with the light on. But that's our guy, and you'll see Jeff wants 10,000 more robots in this, but you know, I don't. You'll see dozens of robots, and the beautiful language that accompanies them will make you mentally picture the other 10,000. Without even seeing them, you'll know that they're there. But you know, I'll post when I finish the pencils, which will probably be tomorrow late morning. I'll post those with the results. I've got one of these, and I'll include either a New York or a San Diego Comic-Con from last year, and a nice little tick sketch with you. And we'll raffle that off. It'll go out to one of you folks that was nice enough to support us this evening. And thanks for checking it out. Remember, it'll be Planet Comics. The story I'm doing with him is called 1 in a Million. And I'll be sure to share it all across the social medias. And if you dig what you saw here, hopefully you'll like some of the artwork we post as it gets done. The other stuff is really good that's in it that I've seen. Give it some support. Thanks again, everybody, and have a good night.